As discussed in my previous video, I told you that I find Supabase really exciting. Today, I'll teach you guys how to use databases with row-level security along with authentication in Next.js. So this is the project that we'll be building today. So at first, the user should log in using Google OAuth, and then they can choose to view their notes using a certain endpoint. They can also choose to add notes, and they can also choose, if they want, they can delete or update their notes. So let's get started. In your Google Cloud Platform screen, go to OAuth consent screen. Here, set your project up. Next, go to Clients, Create Client, Application Type, so it's a web application. Then configure your web application name. Next, under Authorize JavaScript origins, you have to write your app URL. So in this case, we'll only be using localhost. Within redirect URIs, you have to navigate to your Supabase project and then find your URI. For example, in your Supabase project, you go to Authentication, sign in /up, and then you find your URI keys. So for example, Google, I have to maximize this, enable sign in, and then you write your client IDs, which we'll find it later. But in my case, our callback URL is this one. So now we have our client IDs, we just copy them to our Supabase console. Save. Next, I want you to go to branding, scroll down to find authorized domains, and then you add your domain. To find your domain, you go to settings, data API, you copy the URL, and then you paste it here, and then you move the HTTPS part. That's it. Next, I want you to set the scopes. So you go to data access, add or remove scopes. Then, so it basically says what information we need from Google. So we need the email, we need their profile, and we need their OpenID. And then update. So now that's it for Google Cloud Platform. Let's head back to Supabase. In your Supabase project, go to databases, and then let's create a table. So for this video, we're going to create a simple note-taking app. So let's name this table notes, enable row-level security, and then let's add some columns. So ID created at, then let's add a title of type text, another column of user ID, so it's going to be like a foreign key that will link to our users table, which will be of type UUID. Save. Let's now create our policies. Click on add RLS policy and then create policy. Let's give it a name. So for example, for insert, we need to make sure that only authenticated users can create a note. So our policy name should be authenticated users can create notes. Change the target role to authenticated. I have to set it to insert with check. So select auth.uid as UID. So the user's ID of this new row should be equal to the current user's ID of the node entry. And then click on save policy. Now let's create another policy for the select clause. So select, then let's rename the name, policy name, to users can only view their own nodes. So this time the check should be select auth.uid. So the user ID should be equal to the user ID in the node of the existing node. Then save policy. Let's do something similar for the update clause. So update, users can only update their own nodes, and then this time we're going to make a check to see if the user ID UID is equal to the UID of the current node. So this will check if the current row's user ID matches the current logged in user's ID, and then it will create another check to see if the new row matches with their user ID, and then save policy. Let's create another policy for deletion. Rename the name. Users can only delete their own notes, and then the policy target role should be authenticated, so we should make sure that they're authenticated as well, they're logged in as well. Then let's double check if everything's fine and then save policy. Let's now create our Next.js project. So in your terminal, since we need to build a next project, so npx create next app and then the name of our project, so this case Supabase nodes tutorial. We need Typescript. Let's use ESLint, tailwind yes. Now that we have built our project, let's now launch this project with VS Code. So our first step would be to create a util file, a util folder that returns us the Supabase client. So in src, I will create a new folder called utils, and then I'll call it Supabase client.ts. Next, there's some code that I want you to follow. So if you go to the documentation within setting up server-side auth for Next.js, there's this piece of code. So basically this tells you to build a Supabase client that runs on the server. So let's copy it and then put it in our file. And then of course I have to install Supabase SSR and Supabase as well. Of course, since we have our Supabase URL and unknown key, so let's copy it down from our portal. So project settings, data API, copy the URL, then copy your anon key. So the next step would be to write some code that would make sure that we can do authentication using Google. So within your utils folder, you create another file called user-management.ts. So this will make sure that you can log in and log out from your Google account on the Supabase app. So within user-management.ts, we need to make code. So now since this file will be run on the server, so our functions will run on the server, so I have to use the use server directive, and then I create another function called sign in with Google async, and then I create my Supabase client first, create client, which is of type OAuth. Sorry, it's an asynchronous function, and then I have to import my file, my function. Since it will run on the server, I need to have a callback URL. So callback URL. So localhost 3000 auth callback. So when you log in, Google will take you to this URL, and then we should handle this from there. And then we actually write the code to sign in with OAuth. So our provider should be Google, and then the options should be that the user should be redirected to this URL after they've logged in. So if there is an error, I log out the error, and if there is a URL, so if data.url, I redirect the user to this URL. Of course, I need to import this. Let's now end this function. So now that the user has signed in, I need to make sure that they can also sign out. So const sign out, and then basically whatever is happening. So await create client, and then since we have a client, if they click on the sign out button, we should invoke the sign out function. That's it. Let's now export this. So export sign in with Google and then the sign out function. Save. So the next step should be to build a front end that will use both of these functions. So within the app directory, I will use my page.tsx file. I will remove all of this. Obviously, since home will be a server component, I can use my server function, so Supabase, and then I can get my create client function. So obviously it's a promise, so await and then async. So my next step should be to check if a user actually exists. So to get the user, what I'll do is I'll create something called user data, and then I check if there's a user that exists. So get user will give me everything about the current session. So since I said that we need to check if the user actually exists, if the user has actually logged in, so then what I do is I first check if there's a user that exists, and if they do exist, I can just do an h1, so hi, and then the username. So user data dot user, and then the metadata, so everything about the user, and then dot full name. Next, I can create a button that can let the user log out. So here I'll create another variable, another file called button.ts. So components button.tsx. Let's create a button here. So since our button has to be interactive, it has to be a client function, a client component, type button props. So I want an onClick function, which is of type void, and then a text. So it will display the text on the button. Let's end it, and then actually declare my function. So export const button, which is of type React functional component, button props. So I return a button of class name, of these styles, and then onClick will be, so when it's clicked, it will run the function whatever is in passed as a prop. Save it, and then let's use it in our page.tsx file. So button onClick sign out. So the text should be sign out. Let's import our stuff, and then so if the user does not exist, we can create another button. So when on click, async, sorry, not async, we can just sign in with Google. Let's now test it out. So let's now try logging in. So sign in with Google, and then I can click on my account. So I can, as you can see, the Google consent screen is being showed up. Choose my account. So we have an error here. That's because I haven't handled this URL. So if you remember, I configured my auth callback URL, but I still haven't handled this URL. Now to handle the URL, I have to create another folder within this project. So let's call it auth, since it was within auth, and then callback. So since this will handle my URL, route.ts. So now we need to find documentation on how to handle this route. So if you go to the login with Google page, in the documentation you can find your code, which is around here. Let's copy it and then we paste it. So, and then of course I need to fix my import. Let's now test it again. So we sign in with Google, we select our account. Nice. So now my name is being showed up. Let's try with another account. So sign in with Google again with my other account. Continue. Great. So now it works. Let's now actually write some code that allows the user to enter stuff in their notes. But before we do that, let's check in our database if users actually exist. So in authentication, so as you can see, I have a UID, my email address, and everything is being showed up. Let's now write other code. Let's start by creating some code that will help the user create notes within the database. So here I create, within my utils folder, I create another folder called DB. So for database related stuff, new file, notes table.ts. So notes table.ts will be my accessor function to get my instance of the notes table. So this will be really simple. So I import my client and then const get notes table async. So I have to use my async await stuff, const notes table. So await create client dot from, and then the name of my table, so it's notes. The n should be capital. Then I can return the notes table. Of course, the last step is to export this. Now let's write some code to enter stuff within the database. So within my utils folder, I create another file called enterdata.ts. So const enterdata async. So of course it will take just one parameter, text of type string, and then I can get my notes table. So const notes table, and then await get notes table, so my instance of my notes table. And then all I have to do is insert, use the insert function to insert into my notes table. But one thing is that I need the ID of the logged in user. So that's very simple. So const Supabase await create client. Now that we have the client, and then I have to get the user ID. So user data await Supabase auth get user, and then the user ID of my node should be the user data and the ID. If there's an error, I just log it out. Let's now test if it works, but before doing that, of course, I have to export this. So within my app, I create another folder called notes. Oops, I created a file. Let's delete it. I have to create a folder. So within the add directory, I create my page. So now let's write some code. Let's create a component. So notes add page fc, and then I can return a div. Now let's think about it. So our notes page, when they add stuff, they need interactivity, right? They need a button that should have an on-click handler. So again, we need to build a client component. So within components, we create another file called noteform.tsx. Let's now create this component. So noteform of type react.fc. So it should have a text area, and if I have a text area, I need a state to track its value. So node value, set node value. Okay, I have to clean this up a little, and then return. So I should have a div, and then I should have a text area. So the value of this text area should be whatever node value has, and if it changes, set the node value automatically. I should as my placeholder enter your node here, and then let's add some styles. I'll put my own styles here. So background white, text black. Let's make it take half of the width, whatever, and then let's make it rounded. Now I want to check if my nodes, if I can actually see my text area. I need to export this as well, and then I have to use it in my page.tsx file. So node form, and then I have to fix my imports as well. Let's test it out. So nodes add. Okay, so I need to configure this as a client file. So node form, since I have a state, Next.js basically told me to use this directive. So now it's working. Let's now add a button in my node form component. So node form and then button on click. So there should be an async because I need to enter data, and the enter data function was asynchronous. So await, yeah, it will be a multi-body function. Await enter data. So my text should be my node value, and then now that they have created their node, I will boot them to my nodes/list URL, which we'll create later. Router, and then I have to import my router as well. So const router, use router. Let's import this next navigation, and then I have to import my button as well. Let's now see if it works. So I have an error here. So basically I have to declare my file, my Supabase client file, as a server component. Go back, use server, the headache. Okay, so now it works. Let's check if I can actually add a node. Let's go to hello world and then save node. I have an issue. So after a few minutes of debugging, I found out that I need to declare one of my functions as a use server function because it's a server directive. It's a server action. Run it again. So I enter node and then I enter. Okay, so it took me to my nodes list directory. Now let's check within the database if I have some data. Auth tutorial, and then if I refresh, cool. So I have a node with an associated user ID. So if I check my user ID, it should basically match whatever is in my authentication table. Cool. So basically both of them match. Let's now move on to reading or listing our nodes. Let's start by listing all of our nodes. So within app, I create another folder. Sorry, I have nodes already. So nodes, folder, list, then list. So I need a page.tsx, and then let's create a component. So since it will get from the nodes table, it will list everything with it which is in our nodes for each user. So export default, so default nodes table. So my first step would be to get my nodes table instance. Get nodes table. It's an await, async, const data, error. Don't need error for now. I'll remove this. I'll remove this as well. So I can select the ID and the text. Or is it title? Let me check. So it's a title. So we need the title. Let's do a console.log of this, and then I return a blank page. Let's test it out. So if I go to my console, I should expect an array of my nodes. Let's move on further to actually displaying our nodes. So data.map node, then I create another div, I end it. So of course I need to have a key, so node.id. Let's fix it. So it should take us to each specific node. So I create a link, nodes list, and then my node ID. Within my link, I should have my title. So node.title. Then I fix my imports. Let's check if this works. Okay, so I am getting a node, and if I click on it, it will take me to a specific node. For now, we need to handle this page. Let's make it look a little bit better. I'll give it a class name, PG Slate. So let's give it some background color. Let's put the text in the center, give it some padding, make the text white, and give it a margin. It looks so much better now. Let's now view a specific node. So let's basically handle this directory. So within list, I create another folder for handling each ID, and then page.ts. So function nodes detail, and then we need to get the parameter. So since I want this to be a server component, I can't use hooks. The use param is hooks. So let's use some Typescript. Params should be of promise, where ID is a number. Okay. So first I want to get my ID, await params. And then I need to declare this as an asynchronous function. Export default nodes detail. So I want to get my nodes table, await nodes, get nodes table, and then from my nodes table I want the ID and the title of the specific node that matches the parameter. Let's do a console.log this, and let's see if it works. Console. So as you can see, our code now works. Since this is an array, I need to use the dot single function. It doesn't really make any sense to get an array here. Refresh and check again. Cool. So now I'm getting an object. So in this page, I want the user to also delete or update their node. So here I want to create another component. But however, since our component is going to be interactive, I need to make it a client component. So for that, I need to create another helper component here. I'll call it updateForm.tsx. Let's write some code here. So const updateForm will be of type react.fc. So it's a functional component. Return div. So I need some props here, of course. Let's declare some props. Type update form props, and then I want the ID of type number, and I want the string, the title basically, type string. Of course I need to pass in my types here. So update form props, I need to delete this, and then my props ID and title. Let's try displaying our ID and title here. ID title. Now let's use our function. Let's now use this component within our page. Update form ID is their ID, and then the title is our title. Of course, we need to make a check if there actually exists. Let's now check if this works. Okay, so as you can see, I am having my title and my ID. Let's try creating another node to see if everything's fine. Hello world. Enter, and then if I click on this node, cool. So now I'm getting a node. Let's now remove this question marks, of course. Makes no sense. So as mentioned earlier, I want the user to also update their nodes within the update form as well. So here I'll create a state. Text area value, set text area value, use state, which will be of the title. And then I want to basically create my text area and then set the value to whatever text area value exists, and then my onChange handler. So every time the text area changes, the text area value hook also changes along with it. Then I create a button, so on click. So when it's clicked, I want the user to update, but we need to write code to update the node as well. So within DB, I create another file, update node.ts. So since this will be a server action, I want it to run on the server, so it will use the use server directive, import client, import get node table, of course. Next, I need to create my function itself. Async ID of type number, title of type string. Thank you, GitHub Copilot. So let's check this code is fine. So first I get my client, then I get my user. I should remove this since it's not needed, since RLS handles this for us already. Nodes table update where the title is the title. Makes no sense. Remove this. Cool, now it looks fine. Let's now export it. So here, let's go back and create another handler here. So const handler update async, and then await update node type and text area value of ID and text area value. Next, router.refresh. So basically refresh the page. I need to import my routers. Const router equals to use router, and then I need to import it. Whoops, I need to make sure it's from next/navigation. And then basically I have to put in my handle update function here. Title, or is it text? Update node. Then I have to import my button. Let's now test it out. So I need to make sure it's a client function, client component. Okay, if I click on hello world, and then if I add a few exclamation marks, update node, if I refresh, cool. Now let's go back. So nodes list. Okay, now what if I change this one? Node to update node, refresh. Or let's go back. Nice. So everything's working fine for now. Let's now add some code for the user to delete their node. Let's go back. Within your DB folder, create another file called delete node.ts. Since this will be a server action, use server again. But it's getting too repetitive at this point. Import get nodes table. So we just need the nodes table, and then create our function itself. Get nodes table, ID, and then delete the ID. Delete the node with that ID, and then of course I would need to delete it. Let's double check. I don't need this. Okay, let's move on. Now I want to add this button, add this function to one of my buttons. So I need to create another function, const and we'll delete async once again, await delete node of ID. And then I want the user to go back to their list, to their nodes list. Let's end this function, create another button, and we'll delete. but I want it to be red. Okay, let's move on. There's no need. Let's delete note. Cool. So as you can see, this code worked. Delete note. So let's go back to my database. I should expect to see just one entry. Nice. So of course, I would also need to explain you guys how RLS works. So basically, RLS is this security measure that makes sure that users are basically authorized to do a certain operation. So for example, within my database, I declared a policy. So within these policies, for example, each user can only see their own notes or delete their own notes. So what happens if I actually log in as another user? Can I see their notes? So basically, to test it out, let's go back to the add directory. This is confidential. And then what if I try logging out and logging in as another user? So sign out, sign in. Before I was logged in with this user, and now I would want to check if I can see the other person's notes within the other user. So notes/list. Nice. So as you can see, my list is empty. So what if I add a note 2 3 4, and then if I log out and then sign in as the other user, the other note made by the previous user should not be visible. So as you can see, RLS was basically simple to configure, and yet it's very powerful. So that's it for this video. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. Till then, bye bye.